So, I don't know if I'm the only person who feels this way, but over the years, I genuinely believe that traditional work has actually worsened. So, a lot of people in general have been talking about their jobs, more specifically, the fact that their work not only makes them feel very miserable, but also depressed. Now, for those of you who haven't watched my previous videos, I go into a little bit of depth regarding my previous work history, which I would say, if you will, is quite extensive. Although I've mentioned that I've actually had 4 jobs before, technically, if you include my work placement that I did years ago when I was a university student, I've actually had 5 different jobs in 6 years. So my first job was an admin temp / student panelist job that I did when I was a second year university student. So as I was in full-time education, I basically did several temp jobs in between studies, if that makes sense. Mostly relating to recruitment for tutors in various roles that were advertised, as well as participating in feedback groups. Whilst I was studying, I also completed a 3.5-month work placement as an events programmer / coordinator. And out of all the jobs that I've had in my life, this was genuinely the only job I actually enjoyed because I got to utilise my creative skills and contribute various ideas in the programme that I was working on with other students. So after graduation, I spent 2.5 years working as a part-time admin assistant for what was it again? It was a recruitment agency / care provider. And this was actually the worst job that I've done, not because of my colleagues, because I actually loved the team that I worked with. I got on well with my colleagues, and even now I still keep in contact with them. The main problem I had with this job was, of course, management. So unfortunately, the managers I worked for were the types who did not care about their staff. They were more concerned with money and quotas. So as long as they could, cut costs any way they could, they didn't really give a damn about anything else. So I stayed in this job for 2.5 years and then winded up in local authority. And part of the reason I am now in local authority is because of a family friend that I used to work with, who I still keep in contact with occasionally, that told me about my first job in local authority, if you know what I mean. So I worked as receptionist and I lasted 2 years, 7 months, which is actually the longest I've lasted in any job in my life so far. Now, this job went through a restructure last year, so basically all the administrative roles that existed in the department I used to work for were deleted, then they were replaced with new jobs, and then everybody had to re-interview for the new job, if that makes sense. So although I was offered a role, I left because I was getting bored of the department I worked for. The restructure delays were just getting on my nerves, and I pretty much got to a point where I was mentally checked out with the whole process. And now I still work in local authority, but I do a different admin job which enables me to work from home 1 to 2 days a week, because obviously, given the nature of my previous job, working from home was never an option. So now I do a 9 to 5, which has obviously an early start, early finish, and a shorter commute. And with this job, I'm gonna be honest, although I've been in it nearly 3 months, I don't really see myself sort of staying long, and I'm sort of going through the motions in a sense as the ADHD kicks in. So when it comes to working, I've always had a problem sort of keeping jobs, mainly because I get bored very easily, or because there's just little things that I notice. And obviously, as I do work a full-time job, I am working on gaining self-employment, because if I'm focusing on my own projects for a long period of time, I have no difficulty doing the work. So right now I do have a primary side hustle where I sell secondhand items through Vinted, and I also exchange tech through CEX, so I get cash back for it, if that makes sense. And I think in another video at some point I'm probably going to go into a little bit of depth about how I do that, especially because, you know, for people who have autism or some sort of ADHD or something, it's very hard to keep jobs. And, you know, sometimes if you come under that category, you might need like a non-traditional type of job, if that makes sense, or like a creative job, because I find that a lot of people who come under this category, myself included, they're the types that sort of like think outside the box. So that's basically me, really. You know, I've always been like that since childhood. It was the same when I went to school. You know, when I used to go to school, I just didn't really like the idea of sort of sitting in a classroom learning about topics that I didn't really care about. And unless I was doing something practical, I would get bored in classes, didn't really want to be there more than I had to. And, you know, just the idea of knowing that somebody else was designing my schedule for me and things like that, I just didn't like it at all. I did not like it. So today in this video, I'm sort of going to talk about little things that I've noticed since I've started working, and I think you will probably understand what I'm talking about, especially if you yourself have had certain experiences. But before we get to that, this is today's drink of choice, which is Cabernet Sauvignon in a can. They do cans now for this brand, and I didn't know. So let's begin, because there's no script. I'm disorganised, but organised, so here we go. So one thing I've kind of noticed so far about working in traditional jobs is the harder you work, the more work you get. So maybe at one point, at least from, you know, what my parents, more so my dad, has told me, when you used to work hard in a job, you would get some sort of recognition for all of the efforts that you put in for the company, if I make sense. So whenever you used to work hard, you would gain incentives that would actually make you stay long term in a job, because your employer appreciated you and sort of acknowledged everything you were doing. But what I find is in a lot of jobs nowadays, working hard just gives you more work. So if, say, you're doing an administrative position, and I am using previous experience as an example because it's the only way I can sort of explain stuff, right? One day you could very well be doing all the tasks allocated in the job description, and then all of a sudden your employer sort of comes up to you and says, hey, we need you to go cover reception because it's busy on a Friday. So you do that as an occasional favour, and then all of a sudden that favour is now part of your unofficial job description. So rather than just doing admin, you're doing admin and reception, and then all of a sudden your employer just dumps more work, like HR responsibilities or responsibilities as a trainer, where you are teaching new staff how to do your role. And then all of a sudden you're doing like 4, 5, 6, God knows how many jobs for one salary. And this was something I experienced when I used to work as an admin assistant in my third job. So, you know, I was doing admin, I was doing HR, I was training staff, all for minimum wage. And it was a similar thing that my previous colleagues that I worked with experienced as well, where again, they were doing multiple jobs as they got one wage or one salary, and management didn't really appreciate anything. So the most we used to get was maybe a thank you on occasion if we were lucky, and cheap, greasy takeaways. That was it. So you had no pay increases or promotional opportunities because of increased responsibilities or anything like that. And speaking of promotional opportunities, another thing is nowadays it's really hard to sort of progress in a career, if that makes sense, or in a job. So, sometimes what I find is management tends to hinder career progression. So if you're like a person who's really creative in particular and thinks outside the box, and you've got the potential to utilize your transferable skills or anything like that, management gets really funny. And this kind of comes under the career progression thing. So basically, with creativity, sometimes I found, mainly in corporate settings, which is where I mostly worked, it gets suppressed. So you could very well suggest something that can help improve an existing company's working methods, but the managers don't like it because they're used to doing things their way, and their way is the right way and the only way. So in my third job, sometimes if I used to make suggestions on anything, the managers would kind of be like, oh yeah, we will look into this idea, and they never did. Or, if say, although this doesn't come under this category as such, you needed like new equipment. So I remember one time my team and I needed a new admin phone because we had a very, I don't know how to describe it, but we had a very outdated Nokia phone that was very slow, even when you did something as basic as sending an email. And management told us they would look into getting a new phone for us, but they never did that. And we used to use our personal phones to do their work, although that comes under data breaching because we used to deal with personal data from staff, which really we shouldn't have dealt with on our personal devices, because anything can happen, like someone hacking into our phone, I don't know. But the point is, management would never really look into anything for us. They would just kind of dismiss everything we said. And it was really funny, especially with the whole situation with equipment, because they would get equipment for themselves with money they pocketed from staff in this particular workplace, but then they would never get anything staff needed. And then in my fourth job as well, again, it was like a similar thing in the sense that if I wanted to genuinely progress, say, for example, I wanted to do a day of shadowing on a quiet day in a department I was interested in, again, management would get really funny. The same applied when I occasionally produced posters or leaflets for colleagues that had little events taking place at work. They loved my work, but management, again, would get a bit funny because they're saying, why am I doing this in my work time? And it's not like I was completely shirking my main responsibilities. I was just utilizing my skills to do something for the service. So at least, I could be a bit more creative whilst also taking the service into consideration. But again, it's very funny that managers sort of say, oh, there's lots of opportunities to progress, but then when you would see an opportunity and you would want to discuss potential pathways, they don't really want that. So they just sort of like keep you at a certain level because they know that they don't want to replace you, and they know that they are threatened, because there are times where people in general try to progress, but management is very threatened because, they might have this mentality where they might think, oh, this person's going to go for my job or something, I don't know. But yeah, these are little things that I pick up on a lot. And another thing with work in itself as well is I've always found that going to work is the equivalent of going to school, in the sense that you're in the same place at the same time 5 days a week with people that you don't really know or can't stand. I find that the people I work with is very important as a factor in any working environment, because you need to be able to actually, I guess, get on, if you know what I mean. So in every job I've had so far, I've more or less got on with a lot of people, really. I don't know how, because I'm not really a people person. I don't really like socializing much, to tell you the truth. I'm not a clingy person, don't really like being around people longer than I have to, because socializing is very exhausting, and I need time where I can just decompress and be on my own, because I just can't do it for long periods of time. I can't do it. I can't fucking do it. So I mean, you know, what I find is if I like talk to colleagues who are on the same wavelength as me, especially in relation to work in itself, I'm less miserable, and there are people that relate to me and people that, you know, I can relate to, if that makes sense, because at least I know I'm not going mad and I'm not alone when I think a certain way. So, you know, I do have a colleague in my team who has some form of ADHD like myself, and has like a, you know, is into like spiritual stuff and such, and I'm into the same thing, which is a good thing, because again, it's like there's something in common. And knowing that you can sort of have a bit of a laugh, especially in a miserable working environment, kind of eases things a bit, because at least you know you're not going to feel miserable every fucking day. Because to tell you the truth, there are times where I'm at work and I'm going through the motions and I just don't really care about much besides getting paid, which is basically how I am with work, to be honest. Because for me, it's time that I'm sacrificing. It's fucking time. But then when a colleague makes me laugh or something, it does make my day a bit better, because at least I'm not a moody little shit all day, if you know what I mean. But going into more things about work as well, I've always felt, as I've mentioned, that everything is by design. You know, from early childhood, we're often told that we need to follow a traditional path to success. You go to school, you go to college, you go to university, you get yourself a high-paying career. Although, if you were a student, maybe prior to the 2000s, please correct me if I'm wrong, going to university wasn't necessarily I don't know if I can say requirement, but it wasn't necessarily, let's say, forced like it is now. So if you were studying in full-time education, if that makes sense, you could finish school at 16 and then go straight into work, which was what my dad did in my teens. Because with my dad, he had the option to go to university. He just chose not to, because he didn't see the point of spending 3 years studying for a degree that he didn't really want to utilise or whatever. So he decided he was going to go straight into work. He got his first job working in a retail store, selling kitchen equipment for 6 days a week. And then he just worked until he retired as of 3-ish years ago. And then, of course, with my mum, she didn't really finish school in her home country. She came here and then more or less started working when she was 15 and went to college, and she's been working ever since. But of course, she stepped down from management because it got to a point where her previous job made her so stressed, she was physically, emotionally, and mentally checked out. Now, the thing with university is you find that you're expected to go, and there's this whole thing where if you get a degree, you're automatically granted so many opportunities, which is not the case anymore, because if everybody has the exact same qualification as you, you don't really stand out. And coming from personal experience of doing recruitment-based jobs in the past, a lot of employers now require you to have work experience. And on top of that, I find in a lot of job descriptions, everything is fast-paced, meaning that you're doing multiple jobs for the price of one, and then everybody expects you to wear so many hats. You have to work fast, especially in corporate or retail or something. And if you are considered too slow, the managers will fucking get rid of you because they don't want someone slow. And speaking of the type of employees they want, again, it's like school. When you go to school, your teachers are trying to mold you into this obedient student that shuts up, does what they need to do, and doesn't question anything. And if you are an individual, they strip that away from you. They strip away your creativity, and you get to a point where you're not really yourself. You're just like an artificial human being or something. And it's a similar thing at work, in the sense that you're expected to be this perfect employee. You don't question anything, you shut up, you do your job, don't suggest anything, don't say to managers, oh, I don't like how you do X or Y. Don't even question their dodgy practices, because then you get it in the fucking neck. And with managers as well, you know, you have the certain types of managers. And I'm not saying all managers are like this, because you can have good managers. Because if I say they're all like that, it's just a generalization. But you have certain types of managers that think that because they have a certain title, they're better than you. And they think that they own the company when they don't. So, you know, you've got those types that are like... So as I was saying, you have these types of managers that think that because they have a title, they're so much better than you or something. So, you know, you might have one of those types that's like, oh yeah, I'm a general manager, or I'm a fucking regional manager. And then sometimes I just think to myself, okay then, what does that have to do with me? Because I don't really care. I don't. On the outside, I might look a certain way, but on the inside, I just think, well, yeah, I don't exactly care, because you're just like everyone else, in the sense that your job can go at any time. And it is common now for a lot of people to be let go from jobs. I mean, nowadays, you see so many redundancies or restructures, you wouldn't believe it. I mean, where I work, there's been quite a lot of restructures that I've heard about as well. So now when I go to any job, I always assume any day can be my last. So I just plan accordingly, to be honest, because one thing that you should sort of take into consideration is to be loyal to number one. Be loyal to yourself, because loyalty to a company is not it. I hope you've enjoyed listening to today's video, and enjoy your weekend. I'm sitting on the floor because I feel like it, and I'll see you in the next one.